Terry Scoggins Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition Update. The United Nations does not have a separation of church and state. The World Council of Churches is integrated into their governmental system, which of course violates the United States laws on separation of church and state. The United States separation of church and state keeps the state out of the church, stopping Bible censorship, and keeps the church out of the state, stopping any one particular religion from dominating and turning it into a theocracy. We see that the United Nations does not have this separation of church and state. They have anti-blaspheming laws, making it illegal to speak against Mohammed, Islam, or the Koran. They also have the hate speech laws that the United States Federal Supreme Court overturned as unconstitutional religious censorship. The hate speech laws that violated the Christian civil rights, censoring Romans chapter 1 and Bible scriptures on homosexuality, were overturned in the United States by the Federal Supreme Court, upholding their legal right to, quote, debate the issue. The United Nations does not have this separation of church and state, nor freedom of speech rights. Their constitution is very vague. It is not based upon the ideals that the founding fathers in the United States supported. When the United States Federal Supreme Court overturned the hate speech laws, it left the legal right to debate the issue where religions can debate each other. In the United Nations, it is illegal to debate Islam. Those in the Christian faith in the United States that are in counter-cult ministries, those that debate other religious beliefs and theologies from various religions, have the legal right to debate the issue, as there are no longer any hate speech laws in the United States. When discussing the European hate speech laws and the United Nations hate speech laws and anti-blaspheming laws that violate the separation of church and state in the United States, many remember the Netherlands, where a journalist was arrested for hate speech for writing an article in the Netherlands newspaper stating that Mohammed had married a 9-year-old girl and by today's standards would be, quote, a pedophile. She was arrested for hate speech, as they no longer have the legal right to debate the issue nor any free speech rights in Europe. America does not need to follow suit. Sticking with our constitutional rights of free speech and the separation of church and state, stopping religious censorship, and stopping the freedom to debate the issue, the United States Federal Supreme Court upheld the Constitution and overturned the hate speech laws that the Democrats had brought in, Obama and Pelosi, in their hate crimes legislation. Many have seen the financial ruin that globalism has brought upon the United States through NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, where Democrats, pandering to big business, went across the borders, allowing businesses to go to Mexico, getting around environmental laws, labor laws, the unions, and making sure they do not have to pay tariffs to bring their products back into the United States to sell them. Slowly, over the course of 15 years, almost every city in the United States was affected by NAFTA, losing jobs, crashing our economy in the United States. We also saw this in the GATT Treaty, also brought up by the Clintons, creating the World Trade Organization inside the United Nations, giving them power over our foreign trade agreements. An unconstitutional act, giving foreign powers the ability to control our foreign trade, and they were not acting in our best benefit. Our economy shows this. These laws need to be repealed. Globalism attacked our economy and crashed our economic system. Most in the United States are well aware that the Democrats' plan for globalism has failed and ruin the United States economy. Yet many do not see the dangers of global centralized power by a Marxist organization such as the United Nations that believes in working for the, quote, collective good, such as Karl Marx supported. They do not believe in what the United States founding fathers such as Thomas Jefferson supported, in the freedom of speech and keeping a wall of separation of church and state. In the move towards an Islamic caliphate, many Islamists are now in the United Nations World Council of Churches. Many remember Ted Turner standing up and speaking before the World Council of Churches, referring to Christians as, quote, now to be considered the enemy. Many stood up and hailed his remarks. The World Council of Churches was filled with Wiccans, New Agers, and those in Islam who praised the idea of calling, quote, fundamentalist Christianity now to be considered the enemy. The only people in the World Council of Churches to get up and leave at this fascist Nazi-style anti-Christian hate in the World Council of Churches was an Orthodox Jewish priest and a Baptist minister. The rest of the World Council of Churches went along with Ted Turner's anti-Christian hate. It looks like Nazi Germany in its infancy. Again, they are integrated into the United Nations government. There is no separation of church and state in the World Council of Churches. The vast number of those in Islam inside the World Council of Churches are now integrated into the United Nations governmental system. Again, passing anti-blaspheming laws, making it illegal to speak against Mohammed, the Koran, or Islam. Within the last year, the head of the United Nations publicly admitted to an anti-Israeli bias. Most saw this as a public confession to his support of Islam. So far, we've seen a public confession of the World Council of Churches as Ted Turner speaks before them saying fundamentalist Christianity is now to be considered the enemy, with support of almost the whole entire World Council of Churches, as well as the head of the United Nations recently admitting to an anti-Israeli bias, showing his support for Islam. Who runs the United Nations? Remember, they do not have a separation of church and state. There is nothing stopping an Islamic theocracy, a New Age theocracy, or an anti-Christian, anti-Israel movement on a global scale. If we ever have a new world order, the term of a globalist central government used by Islamic leaders pushing for a caliphate, there will be no one to oppose the United Nations, no balance of powers, as Thomas Jefferson referred to it. The balance of power in the United States government was set up to stop tyranny and to stop an overthrow of our Constitution and to stop totalitarianism. There are no provisions in the United Nations so-called Constitution to prevent such. Our founding fathers showed great wisdom in laying out the design and the Constitution for the United States citizens to protect them from tyranny and totalitarianism. We do not see this in the United Nations form of government. The United Nations World Court does not have a jury by one's peers, as that laid out by the design of our founding fathers here in the United States, in efforts to create a fair court system. As well, the United Nations does not allow the media into their court system or into their legislative process. Therefore, there is no accountability in the United Nations. They are accountable to no one. Our founding fathers foresaw this and gave us a free media with free speech rights. The United Nations and the European countries do not have this. The EU and the United Nations do not have a freedom of speech nor a freedom of the press. They have censorship. Large socialist and communist governments control their media. The few free media outlets there have to abide by censorship laws, not just that of hate speech laws and anti-blaspheming laws. Our founding fathers foresaw this and created in our Constitution a free media system, a freedom of the press, and a court system laid out by a jury of one's peers. And they kept the media separate from the government. Our media is not ran by our government to stop propaganda. Few know of the civil rights violations going on in the United Nations and in the European Union due to the fact that they do not have a freedom of the press, and the government runs most of their media outlets, therefore censoring out any debate or scrutiny of their government's actions. Also, preventing any accountability in their legislative process and preventing accountability in their court system, since no press is allowed in. They are not made answerable to the public. In seeing this, we see the folly of the Democratic Party and the Clintons in signing our military under the United Nations control without writing in a stipulation that the United States has a legal right to say no, we do not want our troops sent in certain places for whatever reason, and without writing in a stipulation that all money spent by the United States tax dollars will be replaced by the United Nations, repaid back to the taxpayers of the United States, stopping the drain on our economy, going to war for the UN, and being their police force, having them controlling our military without our say. It was an unconstitutional act and needs to be repealed, as well as showing folly and the lack of foresight from the Clintons and the Democratic Party that they did not foresee the United Nations using the United States military at their whim, at our expense, and running up our national debt, not repaying the money that the United States spent, bankrupting our system. At this point in the juncture, many have tossed around the term New World Order, all for their own gain. Recently, China made the statement they wanted a non-Americanized New World Order where they lead the UN. Prior to this, many saw that the Islamic groups wanted a caliphate. They wanted a New World Order, global regime, theocracy under Islam, enforcing Sharia law. Again, they used the term a New World Order to describe an Islamic caliphate ran through the United Nations, enforcing Islam across the globe as a theocracy. It seems every communist country, totalitarianistic system, and those wanting to impose a theocracy want to get their hands on control of the United Nations. The United States would be best served to remove all interests from the United Nations, repeal the GATT Treaty and pull out of the World Trade Organization, repeal NAFTA, and get our governmental system back on track, saving our economy, and undoing the damage the Democrats instilled with globalism. Getting our military out from under the United Nations control, and demanding the money back that was spent when our military was used at the UN's whim. Again, legislation passed by the Clintons with the lack of foresight to write in the stipulation demanding they repay all of our tax money spent when they send our troops out to do their will, without our involvement in the decision-making process of how our military and our money will be used. Since the United Nations court system was not designed to be a system of fairness, no jury of the peers, no press from the outside allowed in for accountability, the United States should not sign on to the World Global Court. And another legitimate reason to have the United States remove all aspects of our government from the United Nations is the fact that the United Nations does not have a separation of church and state and does not have a freedom of speech and freedom of the press. We would not want their laws to override our laws, nor to be judged in a global court system where our laws and our constitutional civil rights would have no bearing, that the UN laws would prevail over our constitutional civil liberties. It would be ignorance to follow suit along with the EU and lose our constitutional civil rights and our United States Constitution. Our military should not be used at the whim of the United Nations to enforce their rules, their laws, based on their own private decision-making and ignoring the United States input, ignoring United States laws and our Constitution, yet using our troops and our money. The decision-making process of where to send our troops at the United States' expense would be made by foreign representatives in the United Nations, and they are not elected officials elected by the United States citizens. At no point is it legal or constitutional to have someone come in from an outside foreign country, non-elected officials by United States citizens, controlling our money system and our military. The Clintons and Democrats lacked foresight in writing the legislation allowing the UN control of our military and our money. The United States has seen the cost of the lack of wisdom from the Democratic Party and the Clintons with their globalist agenda in signing our military under the United Nations and allowing them to control our foreign trade through the World Trade Organization created by the Clintons' GATT Treaty and their signing of NAFTA. Their legislation has helped bankrupt the United States. Repeal their legislation. Expose the farce that globalism has helped the United States, or that globalism is a goal that the United States should aim for. America has seen the damage Democrats' globalism has thrusted upon the United States economy. Make sure that the United States does not also suffer civil liberties violations by having UN law usurp the United States Constitution and our civil rights, and losing that balance of powers that prevents tyranny, losing our freedom of the press and freedom of speech that keeps our government in check. This has been another edition of Carrie Guerin-Scoggins' Political Newsletter Bible Prophecy Times Edition Update. Look for more information, Carrie Guerin-Scoggins' Political Newsletter and Carrie Guerin-Scoggins' Political Newsletter Bible Prophecy Times Edition, Facebook pages and bloggers.